one thing's for sure, last year the NFC South was a dogfight. I mean, Tampa fell by the wayside very quickly, which was, I admit, surprising to me, because I thought they were going to win the division. Oopsie daisies. But you've got New Orleans, Carolina, Atlanta, all make the playoffs, all over 10 wins. It was a tough division last year. And looking at the Carolina Panthers, it was amazing to me how throughout the entire year, a team that was only 2 years removed from the Super Bowl but had a down year in 2016 comes back in 2017 and they're in the playoff hunt. They're in the hunt late to win the division. And it never really felt like anybody was talking about them. It never really felt like they got enough attention or enough buzz or enough consideration as being a legit contending team. Considering just 2 years before, they were the conference champs. I don't know why that was. Maybe they weren't the sexy pick. Maybe, just maybe, there's some lingering backlash to Cam Newton and the Panthers' performance in the Super Bowl. Could be any combination of things. But the Panthers were a pretty good team last year, with still a lot of their core in place, where you could realistically think that they may have some ability to have a similar level of performance in 2018 and perhaps take a step and become a contending team this go-round. It's possible. Now, that said, they have some flaws, they had some holes, and they needed to address them in the draft, because this is not a team that was going to be able to address a ton of needs in free agency or even in the trade market. They needed to find a couple of guys in the draft that could help them. And to me, it really came down to two things. Number one, you had to get more help for Cam Newton. That was not negotiable. You had to get better at the skill positions. You just had to. They've never really effectively replaced Steve Smith, and that is a simple fact of the matter. Yes, you spent the 8th overall pick on Christian McCaffrey, and that most certainly was helpful. But you are still talking about a guy that you use more as a gadget back and a slot receiver than a true 3-down back and true difference maker. He's a Swiss Army knife type of guy, a better version of Reggie Bush, and again, a good start, but not nearly enough. And you look at the receiving core that Carolina has. It intimidates nobody. It concerns nobody. It worries nobody. And to me, by and large, they've either liked one of two types of guys. Guys that are smaller, but aren't very athletic, outside of maybe Curtis Samuel, who they took in the second round last year. I would hope to see more out of in 2018. Or they like big, slower receivers that also aren't really all that athletic. For some reason, they like receivers outside that aren't very athletic. And I'm sorry, if you're the Panthers, you have to understand that you are ultimately only going to go as far as Cam Newton takes you. And that is just the simple fact of the matter. Yes, your defense played much better in 2017. Yes, this, yes, that. But it is still the Cam show. And to ask Cam Newton to go out there and be that dude and take you to this level, when you give him this level of talent to throw to. I mean, once Greg Olsen goes down, last year with injury, you could say you do what you can to try and get by, but you're not scaring anybody. You're not worrying anybody, intimidating anybody in terms of having to defend your skill position players. You had to get better at the wide receiver position. So I'm totally not surprised that the Carolina Panthers ultimately chose a wide receiver in round 1 and they went with DJ Moore. I totally and completely get it. While DJ Moore was not my number 1 wide receiver on the board, I totally get and understand why they took him. I think the fit is very good. I think he has the ability to come in and make an impact from day one. Not only that, I think he has the ability to come in and be the team's number one wide receiver from day one. They needed somebody on offense that could make an impact. And they needed somebody that could make an impact day one. And I think DJ Moore is that guy. So it was a logical, need-based, but necessary, sensible, decent value type of pick. He wasn't the best player on the board, but he also wasn't a huge reach. And ultimately, from a philosophical standpoint, you had to help out Cam Newton. Period, point blank. Then, on day 2, they invested a couple of picks in their secondary, which I feel like was the weakness of their defense as a unit. Donte Jackson, the corner from LSU, he's not that big. He's really, really slight of frame, but he's really, really fast. Now, can he play? I would say in terms of his athletic profile, there are definitely similarities to Adoree Jackson, but I liked Adoree coming out of USC more than I did Donte Jackson coming out of LSU. They're not quite the same player. Adoree was better in run support. I thought Adoree's effort level was better and more consistent. His technique was also a little bit better. But when you're talking about towards the end of round 2, Donte Jackson could at least become a very high-end slot corner. And with that athleticism, that quickness and speed, he could eventually stick outside and be a guy that's really tough to go over the top of. So I get the pick, and I don't have much of a problem with it. I think the better football player in terms of the secondary of guys was Rashaan Gaulden, the defensive back from Tennessee. Now, are you going to play him at corner? Are you going to play him at safety? I would assume they may try him at safety, and if they do, he's probably a year 1 starter. He's one of those guys that doesn't overpower you with measurables. He's just a solid football player. So you take the swing at Donte Jackson's athletic upside in round 2, and you come back in round 3 and get the more surefire, solid football player in Gaulden. So I still liked what they did in day 2. In terms of day 3, you look at Ian Thomas, the tight end from Indiana. I look at him and I say, this is a guy that you draft with athletic upside, some room to grow, some work that needs to be done, but there is a possibility that he ends up being the eventual replacement to Greg Olsen at the tight end position. Does he contribute a ton right away? And maybe not that he contributes right away. But I do see future starter potential in this guy. I don't know that he's a Greg Olsen level tight end, but he could be a solid tight end for you. And in round 4, he was a good pick. And then you look at Marquis Haynes from Ole Miss. This is a guy, undersized. What's his role really going to be? At this point in time, on day 3, he lacks some measurables, but he was a highly productive college player. And you feel like Carolina, especially Ron Rivera, in that linebacking core, might be able to figure out a role in sub-packages and sorts for Marquis Haynes. It seems like a pretty logical pick. And it's funny to me that they addressed the linebacking position 3 different times in the draft. They're probably looking to move on from Thomas Davis eventually. Maybe it's some indication that they're not that pleased with Shaq Thompson, or they just wanted some depth at the position, and they wanted some guys that can make an impact on special teams. I would expect Haynes to at least be able to do that for sure. So when I look at this draft, Carolina picking 24th in round 1, not a ton of picks to play with. I thought it was okay. It was not one of those ones that was just overwhelming. But Ian Thomas makes sense in terms of trying to take a swing at finding your replacement for Greg Olsen long term. DJ Moore made a ton of sense. Now, should it have been Calvin Ridley? Maybe. If I was the Panthers, would I have maybe invested multiple early picks on the wide receiver position? Probably. But I do love the pick of DJ Moore for them. I love how they address the secondary multiple times in day 2. Getting a high upside type of athlete in Jackson and a solid football player in Gaulden. So I feel like we will look at this draft class in 2 or 3 years and be like, it was okay. They had a couple of guys that produced out of it, and some of the other guys just kind of went away, which is usually your measurement for an average to solid draft class.